So now the next step of what I'm going to do is I want to get rid of this really long, curvature here. I want to tighten it up kind of like this here. So let's do that now. First of all, what I will do is I'm going to add more edges here to this part of the model. So I'm just going to go ahead and just right click and drag over this section. Then I'm going to go and use loop slice, and I'm just going to place one edge over here. And I'm going to create a few more along this model like this, just because I can. Now if I try to do that again, you'll notice that right now this curvature no longer goes as long as it used to. It's now a little bit tighter along here. Now if I look at my original mesh over here, you'll notice that I in fact have a little bit more detail all the way across. I have more spans over here, and I have a little bit more over here. So let me just go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and just add even more spans like this. And as you can see, it is getting a little bit more tight. The corners are getting a little nicer. The one thing what we're still missing, however, is, this nice edge that we have, but I'm going to leave that for last. So before I do that, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to get out of my smooth mode. So I'm just going to press tab to toggle out. And next what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and start smoothing and working on this surface a little bit more. So I'm just going to go ahead and select these edges here. I'm going to press Alt L, and I'm just going to go ahead and just loop slice this as well. And yeah, I guess I probably should do that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just double click over here. And once again, remember that whenever you double click on edges, you select the entire edge loop of whatever that your cursor was over. However, since there is a polygon here, or a vertex that has 5 shared edges, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I know for a fact that if I double click here, it will stop over here, and that's exactly what I want. So I'm just going to take this edge and I'm going to use the move tool. So press W and move it over like this. And the reason why I want to do that is because now when I smooth this object, you'll notice that there is some, in fact, curvature over this area. And then this curvature kind of seeps its way into this sharp part of this model. So I'm going to go ahead and just show my wireframe again. And remember, all I did was I go to shade options, wireframe, and I go between none and colored. And there is in fact a script that lets you toggle. So all I did was I just went ahead and just ran a script that I found online. And then I just set it to a hotkey over here, like I showed you before in a previous video. So this is all fine and dandy right now. Guess what I could do is I could just go ahead and just select this edge and that. Now you might have noticed that I selected a lot more than I wanted, because all I really wanted was I just wanted this, these two, and these, and that, and that, and that, and these. So there's ways to, quickly select this. I could just easily double click and then, deselect parts and whatnot. But anyways, for the most part, if you just align your view to whatever that you want, you can easily just go to middle click or left click and just very quickly select whatever it is that you're looking for. And here I'm just going to once again press W, and I'm just going to slightly offset this just a little bit, because what I want is a lot more curvature over here, and then less and less as I reach the middle. Now of course these edges are a little too low. What I actually want to do is I want to make sure that I just select this all the way through. And I'm just going to slide this edge closer to this one. Not too close, but just slightly closer. And of course that is over in an edge menu. You'll notice the slide tool, and I can just slide this result over like that. And of course I can select this edge loop as well. Now there is one tool that I haven't been using yet, or I haven't actually shown it yet, but what I can do is I can, if I need to select from here all the way to here, and all I'm doing is I'm just pressing or I'm left clicking on one edge, then I press and hold shift, and I press and hold and select the second edge. If I define a beginning and an end, I can select all these edges in between if I go ahead and just use the select between tool. And of course you can see here shift G. And of course Modo will in fact select every edge in between. Now in this case where I only have a few edges, it's really not that big of an issue because I could easily just select 2 edges and then press up on my keyboard. It's all the same. But when you have a model that's a lot more complex and you have a lot more curvature, sometimes it actually makes sense to do that. So Shift G is the hotkey to use. Next, I'm just going to go ahead and just use slice or slide, and I'm just going to go ahead and just slide these slightly, and now I have a nicely created curve that I've made on my own. All right, so we have done that. Next up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and perhaps do something like, what I did over here. Just going to move this. Actually, you know what? Before I do that, I'm just going to go ahead and just add more curvature to this. You'll notice that my original wrench has, in fact, a little bit of a curve here. So I'm going to add that into my model. So I'm just going to go ahead and select these edges here, and I'm going to move them back like this. And then, of course, I have to select these edges here, and I have to move them back as well. And I'm just doing this manually. You know, if you want, you could always use the slide tool. That will work just fine, especially to even things out. I can easily just, again, select this, and I can move these. And I'm just eyeballing the curvature of this model like that. And of course, when you're moving things along the Z and X, you could just use this circle here and just move things like that. And it's perfectly valid. Of course, when I go ahead and just smooth my model, you'll notice that it is in fact starting to look a lot nicer. Now this thing here is a little bit long, so I'm just going to move this slightly back. So I'm just going to select those top edges and move them back a little bit. And I guess what I could do is I could just go ahead and just select some of these and also, slide them along by, again, using the green circle here. And I'm just going to keep playing with this result until, of course, I have something that just has a very nice kind of curve all the way throughout. Now, of course, I could look only at my smooth result, but I really have to make sure that I look at my overall mesh as well, because I really want to make sure that my mesh at its lowest result before smoothing is nice and clean. This is really important. And the reason why it's important is because when other people start working on your stuff, when you give your models to other people, you want to make sure that they are in fact clean and easy to work with. Now, when using the loop slice, and right now I'm just using the loop slice over here, you'll notice that sometimes when you use it, considering that there's a different distance, it actually works on percentage. First of all, you'll notice that it's placing these edges based on percentage. Now what this means is that when you're using loop slice, it calculates it basically places every single vertex or every edge in the middle of your entire selection. So what that means is I made this selection here and I'm wanting to split all these edges by half. So I'm just going to enter loop slice, and you'll notice now that this edge is a lot shorter than this one here. Of course, when I start to do something like this, my distance is of course different from all these edges that I have here. This is not going to work out very nicely. So what I'm going to do is, after I have, of course, done my initial cut of loop slice, I'm just going to go ahead and just deselect my tool here that I was using. I'm just going to go ahead and just deselect this over here. So I'm just pressing Control and I'm using right click or middle click while holding Control to deselect that. And then I just go to slide and I slide this a little closer. And I just try to make sure that, of course, all these edges are more or less evenly spaced. They don't have to be exactly evenly spaced, but the closer, the better. So now our result is getting a lot nicer looking. And next up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to want to introduce to the model something like this over here. So of course, this is going to be fairly easy. If I unsubdivide my model, you'll notice that I can in fact add more edges here. So I'm just going to go ahead and just select this and do something like this. And then I'm just going to go ahead and just connect it. So now I have an edge running more or less evenly all the way across the model. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and just select the top portion of this model here. And of course, if I select everything inside here, and then I press Shift and up to grow my selection, I know that I'm going to select everything beside it, so I get a selection like this. And now what I can do is I can bevel everything here upwards. So I'm just going to go ahead and just bevel it upwards. But before I do that, I want to make sure that 100% that this selection here, that this portion of the model that I have selected right now is 100% flat, just in case. So I'm just going to go ahead and select my scale tool. So I'll press R. I'm going to make sure that, first of all, it's set to automatic, so that's okay. And I'm just going to make sure that my y-axis is set to 0. So I'm just going to set that to 0. Nothing has changed, but again, just in case, I wanted to make sure that this was perfectly flat. So I went ahead and just right-clicked and dragged over here, and then I press Shift up to select all the polygons beside it by growing the selection. And now I'm going to go ahead and just use Bevel, or rather Mesh, Edit, Bevel. And now I can move it slightly up like that. And now when I try to subdivide, you'll notice that my result looks very ugly. There's a very good reason for that. So I'm just going to go ahead and undo that. And I'm going to do that again. I'm going to make sure that my polygons are in fact selected. I press B for bevel, and I try to go ahead and just use the handle to extrude. The reason why that looked like that is because if we do a test right now, and I just use the inset handle here, you'll notice that every single one of these polygons is treated as separate. If I go ahead and just press the Group Polygons button, you'll notice that they will in fact be welded together. And now, when I drop my tool, and I drop the selection and I subdivide my model, you will notice that in fact, my result looks a lot nicer now. Now, the only problem I have right now with this is that these polygons were created. That's not a big problem. I'm just going to go ahead and just select these polygons here. I'm just going to press, delete or backspace. I'm just going to go ahead and just press delete, because the reason why I want to press delete is because I want to delete those polygons entirely. If I undo this, and you know what, for now I'm just going to hide my instances. So my result is like this. You'll notice that there's these polygons here. If I go ahead and press backspace to delete those polygons, or if I undo and I press delete, you'll notice that the result is more or less the same. But what I've showed you before is if I go ahead and go over to here, and I go to visibility options and go to vertices, you'll notice that if I press backspace, those two vertices are left behind that used to connect those polygons. I'm just going to undo that by pressing Ctrl Z, and now I'm going to press delete, and you will notice that those two vertices are in fact gone. So for the future, when you start exporting your models, just not to create any errors, because I really don't like errors. You know, I don't like to fix my model after it's finished. I just want to make sure that it is finished. So I try to make sure that, errors like that are perfectly just, gone and, just not there. Of course, I'm just going to go quickly into origin to make sure that when I scale these edges now on Z, that they're going to be perfectly flattened. Because if I go ahead and just look at my viewport here, you'll notice that this center portion of this model is not perfectly flat. These few edges here or beveled and inset towards, so they are not perfectly on the origin. So I'm just going to go into my scale tool after I change my action center to origin. And I'm going to make sure that on a Z, so Z here, I'm going to zero this out. So I'm just going to drop this tool and I'm going to go back into perspective. And this is all perfectly flat now. I'm just going to go ahead and just unhide my instances. I'm going to go into a shaded viewport with no wireframe over it. And you're starting to notice that I'm starting to get a fairly nice wrench. It's not perfect, but you know, it's getting there. Next up, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and just create something like this within the model, this little indent here. Well, the way I did that is actually fairly simple. If you go and look at the original mesh, you'll notice that I have almost like a very circular kind of shape here. And there's many ways to do this. One of which is to go ahead and perhaps use a cylinder. You know, that's one perfectly fine method of doing this. And of course I have to be in my working wrench to see my wireframe. So if I go ahead and, well, I guess I could show you the manual way of creating this first. I'm probably going to take the other method for my other wrench. I'm just going to go ahead and just slice this up a little bit more because I'm going to need more geometry to, you know, to add this detail in here. I'm just going to go ahead and select this over here. And right now I'm just creating geometry to define the boundaries of where I'm going to put this detail. So you'll notice that I need this space to be up like that, and I want to make a cut. I want to basically inset all this inside portion. So all this will be on the outside, and all this will be on the inside. So I'm just going to go ahead and right now I'm going to start insetting this downwards. So I'm just going to go ahead and just use the bevel tool. Like that. I'm just going to move this downwards. And of course you'll notice that I have in fact some extra geometry that I don't need, so I'm just going to go ahead and select it and delete it. So once again, you're using the delete button here. And now we have a result like this. I'm just going to quickly go into my smooth tool, and you'll notice that, you know, here I have this nice and sharp edge, and here it's all smooth. So what does that mean? Well, that means that I need more geometry across this section here, across the top. So let me just go ahead and select edges. I'm going to go ahead and just select these two, and I'm going to press Alt-L to select all the parallel edges, and I'm going to use loop slice, and I'm going to move it towards the top like this. Now if I try the same thing again, you'll start noticing that this edge has in fact gotten slightly sharper. Of course, this portion here is looking very ugly. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add more geometry here to round out this result, and at the same time, actually I guess before I do that I could just go ahead and just add more geometry to the top. So I have an even tighter result. Like that. And now I'm just going to go ahead and just use edge slice. I'm going to connect these two here. And I'm going to run that tool again. So I'm just pressing tab, and then I'm hiding my model, and now you'll notice that I have a really sharp edge here, which looks nice, but this portion still looks pretty ugly. So of course the way I'm going to make this look a lot nicer is that I'm going to first of all, well, I'm going to have to clean this section up here. You will now notice again in my statistics, if I look under polygons and I look at how many polygons I have that have more than 4 vertices, I have now 2. So I'm just going to press plus, and actually I'm going to deselect, and I'm going to press plus. And now you'll notice that I have 1 polygon here and 1 polygon here. I'm not going to worry about this one just yet, because, you know, a lot of these lines are just kind of for setup. But this one I don't like. So I'm just going to go ahead and just select these lines here. I'm going to add a little bit more detail here. I'm going to use edge slice and select it like that. I could of course do it a little bit differently, and I probably will. I'm going to add more detail here, like that, and I'm going to use edge slice over here, and I'm going to delete this original edge. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that, and now I'm going to add more detail here. I'm just selecting those edges and using loop slice the entire time. And of course I'm going to do something like that. And I could very easily select those edges here. And, you know, before I use the move tool, I have to make sure that my action center is once again automatic, or selection, whatever. I'm going to left click and just select these edges here. And I can very easily move them like that. So now that I have this result, I'm going to try and press tab, and you'll notice that I have something like that, but I don't have the rounded result that I was looking for just yet. In order to be able to do that, I'm going to have to make sure that I select these edges here, and I just move them around in a configuration where I will in fact have a much more curved result. So I'm just going to start moving these edges here around. And I'm just selecting and moving all this around. And now I'm going to try to smooth again. And as you can see, it is getting a lot nicer here. Still not quite the same as this, but again, it's not that bad. And of course, next up, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and just clean all this up, because I don't like the way this is looking. What I want is I want to have a nice clean edge, pretty much the same way I have running across this model here. I want to have it running across the bottom as well. So one thing you'll notice is that every single time there's these edges running all the way outside, you'll notice that there's these connecting lines running from over here. But here, I don't have that happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and just create some of that supporting geometry. And I'm going to connect this and to delete this edge here. I'm going to connect this over here. And I'm using edge slice again. And now I can delete this, and I'm going to once again do something like that. And now I can very easily create that edge running all the way alongside the bottom of this model. I can move this into location, and then I can connect it. And now you have, if I double click on this edge, you'll notice that I have one edge running all the way around. Now I know that I'm not really using my time to explain what I did there, you know, in any detail, but quite frankly, this is just something that you're going to have to get with experience. And of course, now I'm trying to move this clean edge. I'm trying to slide it away from here, because what I want is I want to have the sharp edge over here, but I want it to kind of flow into a kind of a smoother edge. So I'm just going to go ahead and just select this as well and slide this just as well. And I'm going to try to see what I'm going to get. And of course, I could just take this edge here and just slide it like that until I get something like that. And now when I smooth it, you notice that the result is actually not that bad. The only thing I have to do now is I have to just go ahead and just tilt this object now. So I'm just going to go ahead and just go into my top view and turn on my wireframe. And I guess before I do that, what I'm going to need is I'm going to need to make sure that this entire model is perfectly assembled. Right now I only have one piece to this model. I don't have, you know, on my bottom and my sides are still working instances. I'm going to have to fix that. So before I do that, I'm just going to have to make sure that I clean this model up first. So I'm just going to go ahead and just go into here, press plus. You'll still notice that I have two polygons that have more than 5 vertices, or more than 4, sorry. So I'm just going to go ahead and just clean that up right now. So first off, I'm just going to go ahead and select here. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and just go into edge mode. I'm going to select these polygons here, and I'm going to connect it like that. So now I only have one, which is over here. If I go ahead and press the plus sign to select that polygon, and actually I could, sometimes it'll bug out, by the way. If I have a selection, I just press plus, it'll add to that selection. So you have to make sure that you press, just drop your tool and just select somewhere in open space to deselect your entire selection. And then you press plus and it'll select that new created polygon, or that polygon that you wanted to filter by. I'm just going to go ahead and do something like this, where I just select all the polygons here, or all the edges, all the way across. I'm just going to go ahead and do something like that. And now this model has 0 polygons that have more than 4 vertices. So next up, what I could do is I'm going to want to make sure that I create a full working model of, my wrench. So I really won't need any more instances like I have right now. What I can do is I can go ahead and just select these instances here. So I'm just going to click on one of these, shift and click the bottom one here. And I'm going to right click, and under here I'm going to change type from mesh instance. I'm going to want to make sure that it's a mesh. If I do that, you will now notice that I in fact have a bunch of meshes now. So now what I can do is I can take all these meshes, I can select all their polygons, so I'm just middle clicking and dragging. I'm going to press Control X to cut, or you can just go to Edit, Cut. As you can see, the hotkey is Control X. I can go into my working mesh, or working wrench, and then I can go to Control V, or Edit, Paste. And as you can see, my model is in fact has a lot more pieces. There's one problem though, and that is that you'll notice that this model came in wrong. And what happened here is that I had negative instances. That means I had mirrors or geometry that were mirrored, and of course that mirrored geometry, it had its normals inverted. So if I look at the normals of this polygons here, you'll notice that they're in fact facing up. If I select the polygons here, you'll notice that the normals are facing down. So what I have to do here is I just have to go ahead and just double click on any one of these portions that have its normals inverted. And then I press F to flip my polygons, and my result will be as such. So everything I had previously done, I'm just going to go ahead and invert the normals. And now when I smooth, I get something like that. Now, next up, what I also want to do, and I don't need this piece here, but what I want to do is I want to get rid of my working edges that I had here previously. So I'm just going to go ahead and just delete these extra edges because I don't need them anymore. And of course I have these edges running right across here that I don't really need anymore as well. I have a little problem here, so I'm just going to go ahead and just delete these polygons here. I'm going to clickety click and delete that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and just delete this side of the model. So we only have 1/2 of the model selected. And in fact, you know what? I probably did a mistake of actually converting all those instances, because all I really wanted, I just wanted the top and the bottom. And I don't really need this section here just yet. Because what I want to do now is I want to make sure that I go back to model, that I, first of all, delete the same edges on this section here. Okay. So now what I can do is I can go ahead, considering that this model is still a half, I'm going to have to weld these two pieces together. So I'm going to double click on one section, double click on one section. So I basically, what I did is I used left click, and I'm holding shift, by the way, as well, because I'm going to want to select this. So I'm going to left click and actually double click, left click. And then I'm holding shift the whole time, and I'm going to press and double click on this part here. Or you could, of course, just middle click and drag across the entire thing. The reason why I wanted to do this is because I'm going to now weld all the vertices in the middle. And the reason why I wanted to select the entire model and not just apply a straight weld or a merge tool is because if I select everything, and I'll show you basically the way it works. If I select everything here and I use the merge tool and I just click in the viewport and just make sure that the distance is 0, you'll now notice that a bunch of polygons have in fact disappeared. What this means is that every polygon that has been in fact welded, they get deselected. So you have a very clear idea of what has been welded. If I undo this, and if I just go ahead and just, if I don't select anything, I just go ahead and just use merge, I don't really have a way of telling if anything has actually happened. Has it really been welded? I don't know. Now, you could technically run a test where you now double click on this model and everything is selected, but that still won't tell you if, for example, one of these vertices could be really close but still slightly off, and these vertices here might not be welded at all. But if I do it this way, where I select both sides of the model, and then I use merge tool, you'll notice that it in fact tells me every single polygon that has been welded. So this approach is much, much better. So I have the bottom and the top done, and now I need to make sure that I mirror this to the other side. So I'm just going to go ahead and just change my action center to origin. I'm going to go ahead and just go to duplicate. I'm going to go to just a regular mirror. I don't need to hold Alt anymore. So just a regular mirror. And of course I'm mirroring along the X, and that's fine. If I double click to select this, you'll notice that it's perfectly welded all the way across here. And now I'm going to double click and select this model again. I'm going to go to mirror, and now I'm going to choose the Z axis. So I want to mirror from this side to this side. And of course the major axis on here is Z. So I want to mirror along Z. And now we have a full out wrench. So if I go ahead and just press tab to smooth out this model, you'll notice that the result is actually not bad. The only thing that we are really missing is the tilt here. So I'm just going to go ahead and go into my wrench. I'm going to select this entire portion here. I'm going to go into the rotate tool. And first of all, before I go into the rotate tool, I want to make sure that my action center is probably automatic. That'll work out just fine. I want to make my rotation happen somewhere around here. Like that. And of course I could technically move it out like this. And I guess what you could do is you could just grab some of these edges and make sure you create a curve like this. So I'm just going to move that over like this. Select these edges here and move those edges over like that. And of course, what I want to do is I want to do the same thing onto the other side. Now, of course, if I try to do this manually, you'll notice that this model won't be perfectly symmetrical. What I mean by this is that it won't be, the curvature here that I have will not be the same on this portion of the model here. And I guess I might want to adjust that curve a little bit more. Okay. So anyways, what I want to make sure is that the curvature here, the bend that I have here, the slight tilt, I want to make sure that it's exactly the same here. So I'm just going to go ahead and just delete this portion of the model again. I'm going to select this. I'm going to go to duplicate mirror. I'm going to mirror it like that. But in this case, I'm not going to mirror it all the way straight here because I don't need to. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop this tool after I had mirrored, even though this is still, separate, that's fine. I'm just going to select this entire portion of the model. I'm going to go, well, first of all, I'm going to go back into origin because I want to make sure that I mirror this around the origin. I select this piece here, and I'm just going to mirror this, or I'm going to scale this and invert it along the Z. So now you'll notice that I can almost manually mirror this. And of course, you have to make sure that your scale on Z is -100. Now, it did turn different colors, but you'll notice that your normals are also inverted. All your normals are in fact pointing inwards, instead of like on this side where they are all pointing outwards. So I have to select this entire portion here, press F to invert the normals. Now it's all good. And now I can very easily move this portion of the model here, and I just want to snap this to that. So I'm just going to use the snaps and precision. I'm going to use drag snap rigid. And I'm going to use one of these vertices, and I'm just going to align it to that. Of course, that was kind of wrong. I'm just going to select this again. I'm going to move this away, and I'm going to make sure that I use snaps and precision, drag snap rigid. And I'm going to snap this vertex here to that vertex over here. And now I have two portions in the model, and I'm going to go back into vertex, merge those vertices, and now you'll notice that I have one full out wrench. Again, it's not perfect. You know, I didn't use any kind of reference besides obviously this, but for the most part, you know, the way I modeled it is, you know, this will work just fine. For the sake of a tutorial, I think it's good enough. So in the next tutorial, I'm going to be taking slightly less, you know, I'm going to be working a little bit faster through, and I'm going to be taking a different approach to model this entire wrench. So again, I'm just trying to show you that there's really no one perfect way to model anything. There's many different ways to model. And again, I'm going to, like the way I, for example, I achieve this detail here, I'm going to go about it differently. The way I go about generating the overall shape of this wrench will be different, etc., etc. So anyways, this wrench is done, as far as I can tell. If I double click it, you'll notice that it's all one piece. There is no vertices on this model that have more, or no polygons rather, that have more than 4 vertices. So yeah, onto the next wrench. Cheers.